Hey everyone, ready for a deep dive into something pretty awesome?
Awesome and old.
That's right, we're going way back in time with Aristotle today.
And you know we love a good philosophy deep dive.
Exactly. Specifically, we're tackling Aristotle's idea of eudaimonia. Have you heard of it?
I think a lot of people hear eudaimonia and think it's just another word for
It's
happiness.
like a feel-good, everything's peachy kind of happiness.
Yeah. But it's so much more than that.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, to really unpack it, we're turning to a podcast episode called Happiness, According to Aristotle, The Pursuit of a Fulfilled Life.
Oh, I love that title. Pursuit of a Fulfilled Life. That sounds pretty deep.
It is. And it perfectly captures what Aristotle was getting at. He believed that happiness wasn't just some fleeting feeling, but a way of life.
So how do we even begin to understand this guy? Like, who was Aristotle anyway?
Picture ancient Greece. Think Plato.
Socrates.
Right. Aristotle was actually a student of Plato.
Wow, serious philosophical lineage right there.
And get this, he was also the tutor to Alexander the Great. No way! Talk about a high-powered student.
I know. Aristotle was a true polymath. We're talking logic, ethics, politics, even biology. He was into it all.
That's impressive. But okay, let's be real for a sec. Why should we care what some ancient Greek guy thought about happiness? I mean, times have changed, right?
Oh, they definitely have. But here's the thing about Aristotle. He didn't just think about happiness. He made it a cornerstone of his entire philosophy of life.
So he wasn't just like theorizing in some ivory tower.
Not at all. He had this really systematic approach, almost like a scientist, which makes his concept of eudaimonia all the more powerful.
So it's not just some airy-fairy feel-good stuff. There's actual substance behind it.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm hooked. Tell me, what exactly is eudaimonia? How is it different from just plain old happiness?
Think of it this way. Happiness is kind of like winning the lottery. This sudden burst of joy, but it fades pretty quickly, right?
Yeah, sadly, the novelty wears off.
Eudaimonia is different. It's more like that deep satisfaction you get from working towards a meaningful goal.
Like the feeling of accomplishment when you finally run that marathon you've been training for.
Yes. It's about striving for excellence, living up to your full potential.
So instead of just chasing fleeting moments of pleasure, we're aiming for this deeper sense of fulfillment.
Right. And it's about so much more than just how we feel. Eudaimonia is about living a life that's actually good, a life that embodies virtue.
Okay, hold on. Virtue. Like being a good person. That sounds a little preachy, doesn't it?
I know it can sound kind of old-fashioned, but Aristotle saw virtues as these tools, almost like superpowers, that actually help us live better lives.
Superpowers. Okay, you have my attention. What kind of superpowers are we talking about here?
Well, he talks a lot about courage, kindness, wisdom, things like that. He believed these qualities helped us to face challenges, connect with others, and just navigate life more effectively.
So it's not just about being a goody two-shoes, it's about developing these inner strengths that help us thrive.
Exactly. And that leads us to another really important Aristotelian concept, the golden mean.
I think I've heard of that. Isn't it just about, like, not overdoing it with things, like don't eat too much cake, that sort of thing?
It is about finding balance,
Mm.
but it goes way beyond just cake. The golden mean applies to pretty much every aspect of life.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, think about courage again. Aristotle would say that true courage is that sweet spot between recklessness and cowardice.
So it's not about being fearless, it's about finding that balance between taking risks and being cautious.
Right. And you can apply that same principle to things like how we handle our emotions.
Yeah.
It's not about suppressing our feelings, but finding that balanced expression where we're assertive but not destructive.
So, like, when you're angry, it's not about bottling it up or exploding at someone. It's about finding that middle ground where you can communicate your feelings effectively.
Exactly. And honestly, that's something I think we all struggle with today, right? Social media and the constant pressure to be perfect, it's easy to get swept up in extremes. Aristotle reminds us to seek that middle path, that place of equilibrium.
You know what? That really resonates with me. I feel like I'm constantly swinging between working too much and feeling like I need to say yes to every social invitation. Maybe Aristotle has some wisdom for me there.
I think he just might. And that's what's so amazing about his work. Even though it's thousands of years old, it's still so relevant to the challenges we face today.
Okay, so we're starting to see that eudaimonia is about way more than just fleeting happiness. It's about living virtuously, finding balance, and really mastering our emotions.
Yeah.
But how do we actually do that? Like, what are some tangible things we can do to bring this ancient wisdom into our modern lives?
I'm glad you asked. Because the podcast episode we're diving into today offers some really practical advice straight from Aristotle himself.
Okay, I'm ready to hear these ancient secrets to a fulfilling life. Spill the beans.
All right, let's do it. So, the podcast episode we're looking at kicks things off with a really simple but powerful idea.
Simple is good. I like simple.
Right. It's about cultivating virtue daily.
So, like, trying to be a better person every day.
Exactly. But Aristotle takes it a step further. He says to pick one virtue to focus on each day.
Oh, interesting. So instead of trying to be, like, perfectly virtuous all the time, I can just focus on one thing at a time.
Exactly. It could be honesty, kindness, patience, even courage. And then you just look for opportunities throughout your day to actually practice that virtue.
So if I choose patience as my virtue for the day, maybe I try not to lose my cool when my kids are driving me crazy.
Exactly. Or if it's generosity, maybe you go out of your way to help a coworker or volunteer your time.
I love that. It makes it so much more manageable. Instead of trying to be perfect in every way, you just focus on one little thing at a time.
Right. And it's those small, consistent actions that really add up over time.
Okay, that's one tip down. What else does this podcast recommend?
Another big one is pursuing knowledge and self-improvement.
I could get behind that.
Aristotle believed that humans have this natural desire to learn, and that feeding that desire, expanding our understanding of the world, is a big part of living a flourishing life.
So it's not just about being a good person, it's also about constantly challenging ourselves and learning new things.
Yes. And it doesn't have to be this huge undertaking. The podcast suggests dedicating just a few minutes each day to learn something new.
I love that. A few minutes. Everyone has a few minutes.
Right. You could read an article about a topic that interests you, listen to a podcast, even watch a documentary.
It's so easy to get stuck in our routines, We go to work, we come home, we watch Netflix, and then we do it all over again.
It's so true. But Aristotle would probably say that shaking things up, feeding our curiosity, is essential for staying engaged with life.
So we're cultivating virtue, we're seeking knowledge. Anything else?
We can't forget about the golden mean.
Oh, right, that sweet spot we were talking about.
Exactly. So think about the areas in your life where you tend to go to extremes. Maybe you're a workaholic or you're constantly overcommitting yourself.
Or maybe you're on the other end of the spectrum procrastinating until the last minute, or always saying no to social events.
Yeah, that too. The golden mean is about finding that middle ground where you're honoring your own needs while still engaging with the world around you.
Okay, but that's easier said than done, right? I mean, how do you actually find that balance when it feels like you're naturally inclined to go to one extreme or the other?
That's where self-awareness comes in. Start paying attention to your patterns. Notice when you're starting to get stressed out or overwhelmed, or when you're feeling burnt out or resentful.
So it's about tuning into our bodies and our emotions, paying attention to those red flags.
Yes. And then once you're aware of those patterns, you can start making little adjustments to steer yourself back towards the center. It's a process, not something you can perfect overnight.
So it's like being the captain of your own ship. You're constantly making little course corrections to stay on track.
Exactly. And the more you practice, the better you get at it. And remember, what works for one person might not work for another. It's about finding what feels right for you.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've got some concrete action steps here. Cultivating virtue daily, pursuing knowledge and self-improvement, and practicing the golden mean. This is already giving me a lot to think about.
Me too. And there's still more to unpack. Like, what about the role of purpose in all of this?
Ooh, good point. Aristotle had some pretty profound things to say about purpose, didn't he?
He did. He believed that every single person has a unique purpose, what he called artelos. Yeah. And that finding and fulfilling that purpose is a huge part of living a flourishing life.
Okay, so it's not just about being a good person and finding balance. It's also about finding what makes you tick, what gives your life meaning.
Yes. He even said that the function of man is an activity of the soul which follows or implies a rational principle.
Whoa, that's a mouthful.
I know, right? But what he's basically saying is that there's something unique to each of us, a sort of driving force that pushes us towards fulfillment.
I like that, a driving force. So how do we tap into that? How do we discover our purpose? Is it something we're born with, or do we have to go on some epic quest to find it?
That's the million-dollar question. Aristotle believed that our purpose is often revealed through our natural talents and inclinations.
So the things we're naturally drawn to, like maybe you were that kid who was always building things or writing stories.
Exactly. What activities make you lose track of time? What are you passionate about? Those are all clues to your purpose.
So it's about paying attention to those moments of flow where we're completely absorbed in what we're doing.
Yes. And it's also about aligning those passions with something bigger than ourselves. Aristotle believed that true happiness comes from using our gifts and talents to make the world a better place.
That's beautiful. So it's not just about personal fulfillment, it's also about contributing to something larger than ourselves.
Exactly. And that brings us back to those virtues we were talking about earlier. Courage, generosity, honesty. These aren't just qualities that make us feel good. They're the tools we use to fulfill our purpose and create a more just and compassionate world.
Okay, my mind is officially blown. We're talking about ancient philosophy here, but it feels so relevant to the challenges we face today. Finding meaning and connection in a world that often feels chaotic and overwhelming.
I know, right? That's what's so amazing about Aristotle. His work speaks to something timeless and essential about the human experience.
I'm so glad we took this deep dive together, but wait, there's still more to uncover. What are some specific examples of these Aristotelian virtues, and how can we actually integrate them into our modern lives? Stay tuned for the final part of our exploration into Aristotle's eudaimonia.
All right, we're back and ready to wrap up our deep dive into Aristotle's eudaimonia.
I'm excited to dig into the nitty-gritty of how to actually live this way.
Me too. We talked about virtues in the last part, but can you remind me what Aristotle meant by that word again?
He saw virtues as these essential traits like courage, honesty, and generosity. He believed they were absolutely key to living a good life and to experiencing eudaimonia.
Okay, so they're more than just like nice qualities to have. They're really the foundation of a fulfilling life. Exactly. He actually spent a ton of time outlining all these different virtues and how they all work together.
Like he had a whole system for it.
Kind of. He was very systematic in his thinking.
Well, let's hear about some of these Aristotelian virtues. Give us the highlights. Which ones did he really emphasize?
Well, courage was a big one. And when Aristotle talked about courage, he wasn't just thinking about soldiers on the battlefield.
So it's not just about physical bravery.
Not at all. For him, courage was about facing any kind of fear or challenge, whether it's speaking your mind when you know it's going to be unpopular.
Or taking a risk to start your own business.
Exactly. Or even just persevering through really tough times.
Right.
He saw all of those things as acts of courage.
So it's about having that inner strength to do what you know is right, even when it's scary.
Yes. And he believed that cultivating courage, actually practicing it in your daily life, was crucial for eudaimonia.
I love that. Okay, what else? What other virtues did Aristotle talk about?
Temperance was another one of his favorites, and that basically means moderation.
Oh, yeah. The golden mean, finding that sweet spot.
Right. It's about not going to extremes in anything, work, relationships, even how much you indulge in your favorite foods.
Speaking of which, I think I need a little more temperance in my life when it comes to sweets.
Me too. But you know what's tricky about the golden mean? It looks different for everyone.
Yeah, what's moderate for one person might be totally over the top for someone else.
Exactly. And that's where self-awareness comes in. Aristotle was all about really paying attention to yourself, your patterns, your tendencies, so you can figure out what that balance looks like for you.
So it's like becoming your own scientist and experimenting to see what works best.
Totally. And once you start paying attention, you might notice that you tend to overwork, or maybe you're always saying yes to every social invitation, even when you're exhausted.
Been there. And once you have that awareness, you can start making little changes to course correct.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got courage, we've got temperance. What other virtues did Aristotle think were super important?
Oh, I'm glad you asked, because this next one is a big one. Generosity.
Okay, I like the sound of that one already.
But for Aristotle, it wasn't just about giving money. It was about giving of yourself, your time, your energy, your attention.
So like really being there for people.
Yes.
Hmm.
He believed that true generosity was about recognizing our interconnectedness and acting with compassion and kindness.
Wow, that's powerful.
It is. And, he saw generosity as a key ingredient in creating a more just and harmonious world.
I can definitely get behind that. Okay, so courage, temperance, generosity. Are we missing any?
Well, we can't leave out honesty. Aristotle saw honesty as absolutely essential for building trust. And trust, he believed, is at the heart of strong relationships and a just society.
That makes so much sense. You can't really have a functioning society without trust, can you?
Exactly.
Okay, this is all great, but it also feels a bit overwhelming. Like, how do we actually make all these virtues a part of our lives? They seem like these, I don't know, lofty goals or something.
That's something the podcast episode talks about, too. And the good news is, Aristotle believed that anyone can cultivate these virtues. It just takes practice.
Practice, like it's a skill you can learn.
Totally. He saw it as a process of forming good habits, kind of like learning to play an instrument or training for a marathon.
The more you do it, the better you get at it.
Exactly. It takes effort and consistency,
Uh,
but the rewards are huge.
okay, you've convinced me. But where do we even start?
Well, one thing the podcast suggests is finding role models who embody the virtues you want to cultivate. Think about the people you admire, people who are courageous, generous, honest, and so on. What can you learn from them? How do they act? How do they make decisions?
That's such a good idea. It's like having a living example to learn from.
Right. And another thing you could do is just pay attention to your own actions and choices. At the end of each day, take a minute to reflect.
Like a little self-check-in.
Exactly. Ask yourself, did I act with courage today? Did I show generosity? Was I honest in my interactions?
I love that. It's a great way to hold yourself accountable.
It is. And over time, that kind of self-reflection will help you make choices that are more in line with your values.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive into Aristotle's philosophy. I feel like we've learned so much.
Me too. I hope our listeners are feeling inspired.
I think they are. So, to wrap things up, what are some key takeaways you want our listeners to remember?
Well, the biggest one is that eudaimonia, true happiness, isn't something that just falls into our laps. It's something we actively cultivate by making good choices and working on ourselves.
So, it's about taking responsibility for our own happiness.
Yes, and about striving to become the best versions of ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's a journey, not a destination.
It's all about growth and progress.
Exactly.
And I think another big takeaway is that even though Aristotle was writing thousands of years ago, his ideas are still so relevant today. They can really help us to navigate our modern world and live more meaningful lives.
I completely agree.
Well, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with me.
Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
And to all our listeners out there, if Aristotle were alive today, what virtues do you think he'd say are most essential for navigating our world? That's something to think about. Until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.